The Georgia sun blazed down on Emory University's campus as Marcus Thompson adjusted his tie for the third time, sweat beading on his forehead despite the early May morning. At 64, he'd attended plenty of important events, but none had felt quite like this. Today, Jessica was graduating summa cum laude with her degree in biochemistry. The little girl he'd helped raise since she was 7 was now Dr. Jessica Miller, ready to start her residency at Johns Hopkins. "You okay, honey?" His wife Sarah squeezed his arm, her blue eyes sparkling with pride and perhaps a hint of nervousness. At 58, she still had the same gentle smile that had captured his heart 16 years ago, though silver now streaked through her auburn hair. "Just proud," Marcus replied, though his stomach churned with something more complex than pride. He'd been Jessica's father in every way that mattered for 15 years, but moments like these always carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. Would she thank him in her speech? Would she even acknowledge him at all? The graduation ceremony was held in the university's historic quadrangle, white folding chairs arranged in perfect rows across the manicured lawn. Marcus found himself studying the other families, mothers dabbing at their eyes, fathers checking their phones nervously, grandparents beaming with joy. He wondered how many of them had stories as complicated as his. "There she is," Sarah whispered, pointing to the line of graduates processing in their black caps and gowns. Jessica stood tall at 5'8", her blonde hair catching the sunlight beneath her mortarboard. She'd gotten her mother's height and fair complexion, but Marcus liked to think she'd inherited his determination and work ethic. Marcus remembered the first time he'd met Jessica. She'd been a gangly 7-year-old with pigtails and a suspicious frown, hiding behind Sarah's skirt in their small apartment in Decatur. Her biological father had abandoned them when she was 3, leaving Sarah to raise her alone while working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Marcus had been patient, bringing small gifts and never pushing too hard, slowly earning the trust of both mother and daughter. "Mr. Marcus," Jessica had called him at first, the formality gradually softening to just Marcus, and eventually, beautifully, to Dad. The first time she'd called him that, when she was 9 and had scraped her knee falling off her bike, his heart had swelled so large he thought it might burst. Now, watching her take her seat among her fellow graduates, Marcus felt that same swell of paternal pride mixed with something deeper, the knowledge that he'd kept his promise to be the father she deserved, even when it meant working double shifts at the construction company to pay for her piano lessons, her summer camps, her college application fees. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Dean after dean spoke about the graduating class's achievements, their bright futures, their responsibility to make the world a better place. Marcus found himself checking his watch, eager for the moment when individual graduates would be called to receive their diplomas. "Jessica Marie Miller," the dean's voice rang out across the quadrangle. Marcus shot to his feet, applauding enthusiastically as Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Jessica walked across the stage with confident grace, shook hands with the dean, and posed for the official photograph. As she walked back to her seat, she caught sight of their section and waved. Marcus waved back, his chest tight with emotion. But the real moment came when they announced the student speaker, the valedictorian who would address the crowd. Marcus had known Jessica was graduating with highest honors, but he hadn't realized she'd been chosen to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," the dean announced, "please welcome our student speaker, Dr. Jessica Miller." Jessica approached the podium with poise, her speech card steady in her hands. She looked out over the crowd, her eyes finding her family in the audience. Marcus sat forward in his seat, anticipating what she might say. "Thank you, Dean Harrison, faculty, families, and fellow graduates," Jessica began, her voice clear and strong. "Today marks not just the end of our academic journey, but the beginning of our professional lives. We couldn't have made it here without the people who supported us along the way." Marcus felt Sarah grab his hand, squeezing tight. This was it, the acknowledgement, the public recognition of all the years he'd spent being her father. "I want to thank my mother, Sarah Thompson, who taught me that hard work and perseverance can overcome any obstacle," Jessica continued. "And I want to thank my real dad, who couldn't be here today but who always believed in me." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Real dad. The father who had abandoned Jessica and Sarah when Jessica was 3 years old. The man who had never paid a dime in child support, never attended a parent-teacher conference, never sat up all night when she had pneumonia at age 10. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Around him, other families continued to smile and nod, unaware that the man who had raised Jessica, who had walked her to her first day of high school, who had taught her to drive, who had been there for every important moment of her life, had just been erased in front of hundreds of people. Sarah's grip on his hand tightened, and he could feel her distress radiating through her touch. She knew exactly what those words meant, what they would do to the man who had been Jessica's father in every way that truly mattered. Jessica continued her speech, talking about perseverance and the importance of following your dreams, but Marcus heard none of it. The words "real dad" echoed in his mind, each repetition like a knife twist in his chest. 15 years of bedtime stories, science fair projects, driving lessons, college visits, and heart-to-heart conversations, all dismissed with 2 casual words. When the ceremony concluded and families began to gather on the lawn for photos and congratulations, Marcus found himself moving as if in a dream. He watched Sarah hug Jessica, watched them pose for pictures with extended family members who had driven down from Tennessee for the occasion. "Marcus!" Jessica's voice cut through the crowd as she spotted him. She approached with a radiant smile, her arms open for an embrace. "Thank you so much for coming. Did you hear my speech?" Marcus looked at this young woman he'd raised, this brilliant, accomplished person who had just publicly declared he wasn't her real father, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The hurt was so deep, so complete, that it temporarily robbed him of speech. "I heard it," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. Jessica seemed oblivious to his tone, caught up in the excitement of the day. "I can't believe I'm finally done. 4 years of pre-med, then medical school, and now residency. I never could have done it without—" She trailed off, perhaps finally noticing the expression on Marcus's face. "Without what?" Marcus asked quietly. "Without all the support," she finished lamely, something in his demeanor finally registering. Around them, the celebration continued. Sarah was talking animatedly with Jessica's roommates' parents. Other families were taking endless photos. Graduates were hugging and exchanging contact information. But in the small bubble around Marcus and Jessica, the air felt thick with unspoken tension. "I need to go," Marcus said suddenly. "Go? But we're supposed to have lunch at the country club," Jessica protested. "The whole family's coming." Marcus looked at her, really looked at her. She was beautiful, successful, everything he'd hoped she would become. But in that moment, standing in the shadow of her public rejection, he realized that somewhere along the way, he'd lost her. Or maybe he'd never really had her at all. "Enjoy your lunch," he said, turning away. "Marcus, wait." But he was already walking, his long strides carrying him across the campus quad, past the celebrating families, past the future that had suddenly crumbled around him. Behind him, he could hear Sarah calling his name, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, he might say something he could never take back. If he stopped, he might break down entirely. He reached his Mercedes SUV in the parking lot and sat behind the wheel for several minutes, his hands shaking as he tried to process what had just happened. 15 years. 15 years of being a father, of believing he was building something real and lasting, only to discover that in Jessica's mind he had never been anything more than Sarah's husband, a stand-in, a placeholder. Marcus started the engine and drove home to their house in Buckhead, the same house where Jessica had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where she'd had sleepovers with her friends, where she'd cried over her first heartbreak and celebrated her acceptance to medical school. As he pulled into the garage, Marcus realized that every corner of this house held memories of fatherhood that apparently meant nothing to the daughter he'd raised. That evening, while Sarah was still at the graduation dinner he'd refused to attend, Marcus sat in his home office and opened his laptop. His will, drafted 5 years earlier, left everything to Sarah with provisions for Jessica's children, the grandchildren he'd hoped to one day have. Jessica herself was set to inherit a substantial portion of his estate, including the college fund he'd been building since she was 8 years old. With methodical precision born of 15 years of hurt crystallized into a single moment of clarity, Marcus began making changes. He removed Jessica's name entirely, redirecting her portion to various charities focused on education and fatherhood programs. If she didn't consider him her real father, then she shouldn't benefit from his years of sacrifice and hard work. By the time Sarah returned home, tears still streaking her face, and her voice hoarse from trying to explain Marcus's absence to confused family members, the new will was printed, signed, and notarized by their neighbor, who was a lawyer. "Marcus," Sarah said softly, finding him in his office, "we need to talk." Marcus looked up at his wife, this woman he'd loved for 16 years, who had brought Jessica into his life and made him a father. "Do we?" he asked. "Or is this about your daughter's real dad?" The words hung in the air between them, sharp and bitter. Sarah's face crumpled, and Marcus realized that in his anger and hurt he was about to destroy not just his relationship with Jessica, but possibly his marriage as well. But as he looked at the revised will on his desk, Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. Jessica had made her choice public and clear. Now he had made his. The silence in the Thompson household stretched into its third day like a toxic fog, thick and suffocating. Marcus had returned to work at Thompson and Associates Construction, the company he'd built from nothing over 25 years, throwing himself into blueprints and project schedules with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to Jessica's homework and extracurricular activities. Sarah moved through their Buckhead home like a ghost, her usual warmth replaced by a careful politeness that cut deeper than any argument could have. She'd tried to bridge the gap between them twice, once with Jessica's favorite peach cobbler that now sat untouched in the refrigerator, and once with a direct conversation that had ended with Marcus walking out of the room mid-sentence. On Wednesday morning, Marcus was reviewing construction timelines for a new medical complex in Midtown when his assistant Patricia knocked on his office door. A heavy-set black woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for 8 years, Patricia had an uncanny ability to read Marcus's moods and navigate around them. "Your wife's online too," she said carefully. "Should I tell her you're in a meeting?" Marcus looked at the blinking light on his phone. In 16 years of marriage, he'd never refused Sarah's calls. But then again, in 16 years of marriage, he'd never been publicly humiliated by the daughter he'd raised as his own. "I'll take it," he said, picking up the receiver. "Sarah. Marcus." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Can we please talk? Really talk?" "About what? About how your daughter made it clear to the world that I'm not her father? About how 15 years of my life raising her meant nothing? That's not—" Sarah's voice broke. "You know that's not true. You've been the most wonderful father to Jessica. You are her father. Apparently not her real father." The bitterness in his own voice surprised Marcus. He'd always prided himself on being level-headed, thoughtful, slow to anger. But this wound went deeper than anger. It reached into the very core of his identity, into the man he'd believed himself to be. "She didn't mean it the way it sounded," Sarah said desperately. "She's young. She was nervous. She meant it exactly the way it sounded," Marcus interrupted. "A public announcement that I don't matter, that I never mattered." There was a long pause. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "She wants to see you, to explain." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Jessica at 8 years old, sitting at their kitchen table with her science project spread out before her, looking up at him with complete trust as he helped her understand the phases of the moon. He remembered her at 16, crying in his arms after her first heartbreak, calling him the best dad in the world. He remembered her at 22, hugging him after her medical school acceptance letter arrived, saying she couldn't have done it without him. All lies, apparently. Or, at best, convenient truths that she'd outgrown. "I don't want to see her," Marcus said, and heard Sarah's sharp intake of breath. "Marcus, please, I have work to do, Sarah. I'll see you at home." He hung up before she could respond, but the conversation had shattered his concentration. Marcus stared at the construction blueprints on his desk without seeing them, his mind wandering back to all the moments he'd thought were building something permanent, something real. The irony wasn't lost on him. He built things for a living, foundations, structures meant to last. He understood the importance of solid groundwork, of taking time to ensure everything was level and square before building higher. But somehow, in his most important construction project, being Jessica's father, he'd built on sand. His desk phone buzzed again. "Mr. Thompson?" Patricia's voice came through the intercom. "Your daughter's here to see you." Marcus felt his jaw clench. "My stepdaughter," he corrected automatically. "Sir?" "Send her away, Patricia. I'm busy." There was a pause. "She's pretty upset, Mr. Thompson. Says she'll wait as long as it takes." Marcus closed his eyes. Even now, even after everything, part of him wanted to run to her, to fix whatever was wrong, to be the father she needed. It was a reflexive response built over 15 years of scraped knees and broken hearts and midnight fears that needed soothing. But another part of him, the part that had been cut to the bone by her casual dismissal, remained unmoved. Then she'll be waiting a long time. 45 minutes later, Patricia knocked and entered his office without permission, something she'd never done before. Her expression was troubled, almost maternal. "That girl's been crying in the lobby for the better part of an hour," she said. "Whatever happened between you two, maybe you should—" "Patricia," Marcus said sharply, "this is not your concern." She studied his face for a long moment, and Marcus saw something like disappointment in her eyes. "That little girl used to come here after school sometimes when she was younger, sat right in that chair, doing her homework while you worked, called you daddy and lit up like Christmas morning whenever you looked at her. That was a long time ago." "Was it?" Patricia asked. "Or are you just hurt so bad you can't see straight?" Before Marcus could respond, she left, closing the door firmly behind her. Marcus sat alone in his office, surrounded by the trappings of his success: awards for community leadership, photos from construction projects, diplomas and certifications that proved his expertise in building things that last. But none of it meant anything if he'd failed at the one construction project that mattered most. An hour later, his phone rang again. This time it was his brother David, calling from his law office downtown. "Just got a very interesting call from your neighbor," David said without preamble. "Something about notarizing a new will. Care to explain why you're cutting Jessica out of your estate?" Marcus shouldn't have been surprised. David had been his lawyer for years, had drawn up the original will, and was the emergency contact for any major changes. "She made her feelings clear," Marcus said. "I'm just honoring them." "Marcus, what the hell happened? Yesterday you were planning to walk that girl down the aisle someday, and now you're writing her out of your will?" "She announced to several hundred people that I'm not her real father. I'm simply accepting that assessment." David was quiet for a moment. "And you think disinheriting her is the appropriate response?" "I think giving my money to someone who considers me family is the appropriate response." "Brother," David said gently, "you raised that girl. You're the only father she's known. Whatever she said, whatever happened, you can't just throw away 15 years. "I'm not throwing anything away," Marcus replied. "She already did that." After he hung up, Marcus found himself staring out his office window at the Atlanta skyline, at the buildings his company had helped construct, permanent structures built to withstand time and weather and the test of years. He'd always taken pride in that permanence, in creating things that would outlast him, but family, apparently, was more fragile than steel and concrete. At 5:30, as Marcus was preparing to leave for the day, Patricia appeared in his doorway one final time. "She's gone," she said simply. "Left about an hour ago, but she asked me to give you this." She handed him a folded piece of paper and left without another word. Marcus stared at the paper for several minutes before unfolding it. Jessica's handwriting, the same careful script he'd helped her practice in elementary school, filled the page. "Dad, I know you don't want to see me, and I understand why. I messed up so badly, and I'm so sorry. I was nervous about the speech and thinking about how proud my biological father would have been if he could see me now, and the words came out all wrong. You are my real dad. You're the only dad I've ever known. You taught me to drive, helped me with calculus, scared away the boys I wasn't ready to date, and believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I love you, and I need you to know that nothing I said changes what you mean to me. Please don't give up on us. Jessica." Marcus read the letter 3 times, his vision blurring slightly on the second pass. When he finished, he folded it carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he drove home to Buckhead, where Sarah was waiting with red-rimmed eyes and a dinner she'd cooked for 3, hoping against hope that he might call Jessica and invite her over. Instead, Marcus ate in silence, the letter burning like a weight in his pocket. Words on paper were easy. Actions over 15 years should have spoken louder than any graduation speech, but they hadn't, and that truth was harder to swallow than any apology. That night, as Sarah slept fitfully beside him, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Jessica's letter memorized now, playing on repeat in his mind. Part of him wanted to believe it, wanted to accept her explanation and rebuild the bridge she'd burned. But another part of him, the part that had been shattered in front of hundreds of people, wasn't sure forgiveness was possible. Some words, once spoken, changed everything. Some wounds were too deep to heal. And some disappointments were too profound to overcome, no matter how many letters of apology arrived the next day. 2 weeks after the graduation ceremony, Marcus stood in the partially completed medical complex in Midtown Atlanta, watching his construction crew pour concrete for what would eventually become the foundation of the children's wing. The irony wasn't lost on him. Building a place meant to heal while his own family remained fractured, possibly beyond repair. "Mr. Thompson?" His project foreman, Tommy Rodriguez, approached with a clipboard. "We're ahead of schedule on the foundation work. Should we start ordering materials for the framing?" Marcus nodded absently, his attention divided between the construction timeline and the weight of Jessica's letter in his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it for 2 weeks now, reading it so many times the paper had grown soft from handling. "Go ahead and place the order," he said. "But double-check the specifications for the pediatric wing. Children's hospitals have different requirements." Tommy made notes on his clipboard, then hesitated. "Everything okay, boss? You seem I don't know. Distracted lately. Marcus managed a tired smile. Tommy had worked for him for 7 years, long enough to notice when something was off. Family stuff, he said simply. Ah. Tommy nodded knowingly. My daughter's been giving me grief about her college major. Wants to switch from business to art therapy. Says business is soulless. He shook his head. Kids, right? Right, Marcus agreed, though Jessica's situation felt far more complicated than a college major dispute. As Tommy walked away, Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. 17 texts from Jessica over the past 2 weeks. Apologies, explanations, memories of their shared history, desperate attempts to reach through the wall he'd built around himself. He'd read them all, but hadn't responded to any. Sarah had tried a different approach, sharing stories at dinner about Jessica's residency at Johns Hopkins, how well she was adjusting, how much she missed home. But even these updates felt like salt in the wound, reminders that Jessica was moving forward with her life while he remained stuck in the aftermath of her graduation speech. His phone buzzed with a new message. Not from Jessica this time, but from his brother David. Lunch today, we need to talk. Marcus sighed and typed back, Can't. On site all day. The response came immediately. Then I'm coming to you. See you at noon. At exactly 12 o'clock, David Thompson pulled up to the construction site in his BMW, looking incongruous in his expensive suit among the hard hats and work boots. At 61, David was 3 years younger than Marcus, but looked older, his hair completely grey, and his face marked by the stress of 30 years practicing family law. You look like hell, David said by way of greeting. Thanks for the pep talk, Marcus replied, leading him to the construction trailer that served as a temporary office. Inside the cramped space, David accepted a cup of coffee from the perpetually brewing pot and settled into a folding chair across from Marcus's makeshift desk. Sarah called me, he said without preamble. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Of course she did. She's worried about you. Says you've barely spoken to her in 2 weeks, and you won't even discuss Jessica. There's nothing to discuss. David leaned forward, his expression serious. Marcus, I've been practicing family law for 3 decades. I've seen what happens when people let pride destroy their relationships. You're making a mistake. The mistake was thinking I was actually Jessica's father. You are her father, David said forcefully. Biology doesn't make someone a parent. Showing up does. Being there does. Loving unconditionally does. And you've done all of that for 15 years. Marcus stared out the trailer window at his work crew. Apparently not unconditionally enough. She's 22 years old, Marcus. 22-year-olds say stupid things. They make mistakes. That doesn't erase 15 years of history. It wasn't just a mistake, Marcus said quietly. It was a revelation. She showed me who I really am in her life, a stand-in, a placeholder for her real father. David was quiet for a moment, studying his brother's face. Can I tell you something about real fathers, about biological fathers? Marcus didn't respond, but David continued anyway. In my practice, I've seen plenty of biological fathers who were real pieces of work. Men who created children and then abandoned them. Men who paid child support but never showed up for birthdays or graduations or soccer games. Men who shared DNA but never shared love. He paused, letting that sink in. And I've seen stepfathers, adoptive fathers, men who chose to be fathers, who were more real than any biological parent could ever be. You're one of those men, Marcus. You chose Jessica. You chose to love her, to raise her, to be her father when her biological father chose to walk away. She doesn't see it that way, because she's young and scared and probably feeling guilty about the speech. But that doesn't change what you mean to her, what you've always meant to her. Marcus pulled Jessica's letter from his pocket, now soft and worn from handling. "She wrote this," he said, handing it to David. David read it carefully, his expression growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he looked up at Marcus with something like disappointment. This is a young woman who's clearly devastated by what happened. She's taking responsibility. She's apologizing. She's trying to make it right. "What more do you want?" "I want it never to have happened," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "I want to go back to believing that I actually mattered to her." "You do matter to her. This letter proves it." "Words are easy, David. Actions are what count." "Then let me ask you something," David said. "What actions are you taking right now? What are you building and what are you tearing down?" The question hung in the air between them. Outside, Marcus could hear the sounds of construction, hammers and drills, and the steady hum of progress. Inside the trailer there was only silence and the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. "I changed my will," Marcus said finally. "I know, and I think you should change it back." "Why? So she can inherit money from someone who isn't her real father?" David stood up abruptly, his patience finally exhausted. "Because you're being a stubborn fool who's about to destroy the best thing that ever happened to him out of wounded pride." The harshness of the words surprised them both. David immediately looked apologetic, but he didn't back down. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I watched you with that little girl for years. I saw how your whole face lit up when she called you Daddy. I saw how proud you were at every school play, every science fair, every parent-teacher conference. And now you're willing to throw all of that away because she made one mistake in a moment of nervousness." Marcus felt something cracking inside his chest, a hairline fracture in the wall he'd built around his heart. It wasn't just one mistake. It was the truth. In her moment of honesty, she revealed what she really thinks. Or, David said gently, in her moment of stress, she said something she didn't mean, something she's been trying to take back ever since. That afternoon, after David left, Marcus found himself walking through the construction site with new eyes. He watched his crew working together, building something meant to last, something that would serve its purpose for decades to come. But construction wasn't just about the final product. It was about the process, about making adjustments when something didn't fit quite right, about reinforcing weak spots, about sometimes tearing down sections that weren't working and rebuilding them stronger. Maybe families were the same way. His phone buzzed with another message from Jessica. "Dad, I know you probably won't read this, but I wanted you to know that I told everyone at the hospital about you. About how you taught me to be strong, how you supported my dreams, how you're the best father I could have asked for. I'm proud to be your daughter, and I hope someday you'll be proud of me again too." This time, Marcus found himself typing a response before he could stop himself. "I was always proud of you. That was never the question." The reply came back within minutes. "Then what is the question? What can I do to fix this?" Marcus stared at the screen for a long time before typing, "I don't know." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't silence either. It was something in between, a crack in the wall, a possibility that maybe, with enough time and effort, something broken could be repaired. That evening, Marcus came home to find Sarah cooking dinner for three again, hope evident in every movement as she set the table with their good china. When she saw him, her face brightened with cautious optimism. "I texted Jessica," he said simply. Sarah's face crumpled with relief, and she threw her arms around him for the first time in 2 weeks. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for trying." And as Marcus held his wife, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume, he realized that David had been right about one thing. He was at a crossroads where he could either build bridges or burn them completely. And maybe, just maybe, It was time to remember that he was a builder by trade and by nature. The foundation might have cracks, but that didn't mean the whole structure was unsalvageable. 3 months after the graduation ceremony, Marcus stood in the arrival section of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, holding a sign that read, Dr. Miller, with the kind of nervous energy he hadn't felt since Jessica's first day of high school. She was coming home for a long weekend, her first visit since the graduation disaster, and neither of them was quite sure what to expect. The text exchanges had been tentative at first, short messages that gradually grew longer as the weeks passed. Marcus had learned about her residency rotation in pediatrics, her tiny apartment near Johns Hopkins, her struggle to maintain work-life balance in the demanding world of medical training. Jessica had learned about his new construction project, a community center in East Atlanta that would serve underprivileged youth, and his decision to establish a scholarship fund for children from single-parent homes. But text messages were a poor substitute for face-to-face conversation, and Marcus knew that the real work of healing their relationship would have to happen in person. "Dad?" Marcus turned to see Jessica approaching, pulling a small suitcase behind her. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came with medical residency, but her eyes were bright with nervous hope. She'd cut her hair shorter, and there were new lines of stress around her eyes, but she was still recognizably the little girl who used to fall asleep in his lap during Saturday morning cartoons. "Hey," he said softly, unsure of the protocol. Did they hug, shake hands, stand awkwardly, and make small talk? Jessica solved the dilemma by dropping her suitcase and throwing her arms around him. "I missed you so much," she whispered against his chest. Marcus felt 15 years of protective instincts surge back to life as he hugged her back. "I missed you too, kiddo." The drive home was filled with careful conversation, updates about her work, questions about his projects, the kind of surface-level catching up that avoided the elephant in the room. It wasn't until they were sitting on the back deck of the Buckhead house, watching the sun set over the tree-lined neighborhood, that Jessica finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. "I need to tell you something," she said, her hands wrapped around a mug of sweet tea. "About the graduation speech." Marcus tensed slightly. "Jessica, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." She turned to face him directly. "You need to understand what really happened, what I was thinking, because I don't think my apology letters explained it right." Marcus waited, giving her space to find the words. "The night before graduation, I had dinner with my roommate and her parents," Jessica began. "Her dad was telling stories about her childhood, and I started thinking about all the stories I could tell about mine. About the time you taught me to drive in the church parking lot, and I cried because I couldn't parallel park. About how you stayed up all night helping me build that solar system model for science class. About you scaring away Jason Martinez when I was 16 because you thought he was too old for me." She smiled slightly at the memory, then grew serious again. "But then I started thinking about my biological father, and I got confused. All my good memories, all my real memories were with you, but I kept thinking about him, wondering what he would think if he could see me graduating medical school, whether he would be proud." Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest, but it was different now, less sharp, more understanding. "When I got up to give that speech," Jessica continued, "I was nervous and emotional, and when I mentioned my real dad, I was thinking about him. About the father I never had, the one who existed only in my imagination. But as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I realized how wrong they were. Because you're not my biological father. You're something better. You're my chosen father. You're the man who decided to love me and raise me and be my dad, not because you had to, but because you wanted to." Tears were streaming down her face now, and Marcus felt his own eyes burning. "I hurt you so badly," she whispered. "And I hate myself for it. But I need you to know that you are my real dad. You're the only real dad I've ever had." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing her words, feeling them settle into the wounded places in his heart. "Do you know," he said finally, "what the hardest part of being a step-parent is?" Jessica shook her head. "It's the constant worry that you don't really belong, that you're an outsider pretending to be family. That someday the child you love will realize you're not their real parent and decide you don't matter anymore." He paused, looking out at the yard where Jessica had learned to ride a bike, where they'd had countless conversations over the years. "When you said those words at graduation, it confirmed my worst fear. It made me feel like 15 years of fatherhood had been a lie, like I'd been fooling myself about who I was to you." "But you weren't fooling yourself," Jessica said urgently. "You were never fooling yourself. You are my father, not because of biology, but because of choice, because of love, because of showing up every single day for 15 years. Marcus felt something shifting inside him, a wall crumbling that he'd spent 3 months building. "I changed my will," he said quietly, "the night after graduation. I removed you from it entirely." Jessica's face went pale, but she didn't look away. "I know. Mom told me. I was angry, hurt. I wanted to hurt you back." "Did it work?" she asked softly. "Did it make you feel better?" Marcus thought about the past 3 months, the sleepless nights, the distance from Sarah, the way his anger had curdled into something bitter and consuming. "No," he admitted. "It made everything worse." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of damaged trust hanging between them. "Dad," Jessica said finally, "can I tell you about something that happened last week at the hospital?" Marcus nodded. "I was working with this little boy, maybe 8 years old, who was in the ER with his stepdad. The biological father was nowhere to be found, but this stepdad was frantic with worry, holding the kid's hand, asking the doctors a million questions, making sure his boy was okay. She leaned forward, her eyes intense, and watching them, I thought about you, about every time you rushed me to the doctor when I was sick, every time you worried about me, every time you fought for me. That stepdad in the ER? He wasn't that little boy's real father either, but he was doing exactly what you've always done, loving without limits, caring without conditions, being a father in every way that actually matters." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "That's when I realized something," Jessica continued. "Anyone can be a biological father. It takes 5 minutes and no commitment whatsoever. But being a real father, being a dad, that takes years of showing up, of choosing love over and over again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She reached over and took his hand. "You chose me when you didn't have to. You loved me when I wasn't your responsibility. You raised me when you could have walked away. That doesn't make you less than my real father. It makes you more." Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling tears he'd been holding back for months finally starting to fall. "I was so hurt, Jessica. Not just by what you said, but by feeling like I'd wasted 15 years believing I mattered to you." "You didn't waste anything," she said fiercely. "Those 15 years made me who I am. They gave me the strength to get through medical school, the confidence to pursue my dreams, the knowledge that I was loved unconditionally. That's not something you can fake or pretend. That's real." That evening, over dinner at their favorite restaurant in Virginia Highland, the same place they'd celebrated her high school graduation and her college acceptance, Marcus and Jessica began the real work of rebuilding their relationship. They talked about the past, about missed signals and misunderstood intentions, about the complexity of blended families and the courage it takes to love someone who didn't start out as yours. "I want you to know," Marcus said as they shared dessert, "that even in my anger, even when I was hurt and confused, I never stopped loving you. Being mad at someone and loving them at the same time, that's what real parents do. Jessica smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all day. Is that what you're going to put in the father of the bride speech someday? Real parents love you even when they want to strangle you? Marcus laughed, his first real laugh in 3 months. Among other things. So you're planning to walk me down the aisle? She asked tentatively. Try and stop me, Marcus replied, though I reserve the right to glare menacingly at any potential grooms. Some things never change, Jessica said, grinning. Some things shouldn't change, Marcus corrected. The next morning, Marcus called his brother David. I need you to restore the original will, he said without preamble. Hallelujah, David replied. I was wondering when you'd come to your senses. And I want to add something. A college scholarship fund in Jessica's name for children from single-parent households. Kids who need someone to believe in them. That's a beautiful idea, Marcus. She taught me something, Marcus said, watching through his office window as Jessica and Sarah worked together in the garden, the easy intimacy between them restored. Being a real father isn't about biology or legal documents or even gratitude. It's about choice. It's about showing up. It's about loving someone enough to forgive them when they break your heart. 6 months later, Marcus stood at the back of a small church in Baltimore, watching Jessica receive an award for excellence in pediatric care. She'd asked him to come, and this time when she gave her speech, there was no confusion about who she was thanking. I want to recognize my dad, she said, looking directly at him in the audience, who taught me that being a real parent means choosing love every single day, especially when it's difficult. He showed me what it looks like to be committed to someone's growth and happiness, not because you have to, but because you want to. That's the kind of doctor I hope to become, someone who chooses to care, someone who shows up, someone who never gives up on the people who need them most. As the audience applauded, Marcus felt Sarah squeeze his hand. In the 3 months since Jessica's visit to Atlanta, their family had found its rhythm again. Different than before, perhaps more honest, but also stronger. I'm proud of you, Sarah whispered. I'm proud of all of us, Marcus replied, watching Jessica accept her award with grace and confidence. We built something real together, all 3 of us. Later that evening, at dinner in Jessica's favorite Baltimore restaurant, she handed him a small wrapped box. Early Father's Day present, she said with a smile. Inside was a watch engraved with a simple message. To my real dad, the one who chose me, with love and gratitude, Jessica. Marcus looked up at his daughter, his chosen daughter, his real daughter, and realized that David had been right all those months ago. Family wasn't about perfection or never making mistakes. It was about choosing to rebuild when things fell apart, about forgiveness and second chances, and the courage to love deeply enough to risk being hurt. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For teaching me what it really means to be a father. For showing me that love is stronger than biology, that choice is more powerful than DNA, and that real families are built on commitment, not chromosomes. Jessica smiled, the same bright smile that had first captured his heart 16 years ago. Thank you for teaching me the same thing, Dad. Thank you for choosing me. As they raised their glasses in a toast to family, to forgiveness, to the bonds that truly matter, Marcus realized that the best construction project of his life hadn't been any building or development. It had been this, the slow, careful, sometimes difficult work of building a family based on love, choice, and the daily decision to show up for the people who matter most. And unlike concrete and steel, this construction project would last forever.